William Roger Clemens. Did any of you know that Roger was his middle name? I certainly didn't, and I collected baseball cards at the time, so I'm a bit surprised that that one got past me, not unlike one of his fastballs to the outside portion of the plate. And I'm just going to stop for a second and go ahead and apologize to the international audience here. I know me talking about Roger Clemens is probably a bit like you trying to explain to me who Brian Lara is, which I guess I'll figure out when I get around to reviewing Brian's not one but two releases for the Mega Drive. Now see, I thought I was doing good by having a copy of the first one already, but no, I just realized that I still need Brian Lara 96 as well. Oops. Anyway, if you weren't a fan of Major League Baseball from the mid-80s to the mid-2000s, you'd be forgiven for not knowing who Roger Clemens is. But if you were, you'd know that Roger was one of the most feared pitchers in the league for a good portion of the over 2-decade span that was his career in the big leagues. Roger is the only pitcher to win 7 Cy Young Awards, which is the award given to the best pitcher in Major League Baseball for that year. And Roger is the only player to have both 350 career wins and 4,500 career strikeouts. Truly an amazing feat. Although to be fair, the only reason why that is because Nolan Ryan was stuck pitching for some truly terrible teams for a good portion of his career. But at least he got to beat up Robin Ventura, so there's that. However, I should probably pause for a second here because I'm sure that there's some of you out there that don't know me and just got randomly dropped here due to searching for the reason why a pitcher with such an incredible career is not in the Hall of Fame. I'll give you a hint. It's because sports writers are pussies. Oh, boo-hoo, he took steroids. So did everyone else. Let me start over. Hi, my name is Dave, and welcome to Zilog and Moto, the channel where, rather than try to defend a baseball player that I don't really care about and has a reputation for being kind of a dick, I'm actually instead out to collect and review the nearly 1,280 titles released in the English language for the Sega Master System, Genesis/Mega Drive, Sega or Mega CD as the case may be, and finally the 32X. Basically, if I can plug it into a Genesis either by itself or with some sort of add-on and be able to read what's up on the screen, I'm trying to get a copy of it and review it for posterity, with both looks at the original packaging and gameplay captured from original hardware whenever possible. Why am I spending all this time talking about Roger Clemens? Well, to introduce this week's game, of course. Roger Clemens MVP Baseball, which was released by Flying Edge, aka Acclaim, for the Sega Genesis in North America in either September of 1992 or February of 1993, depending on which internet resource you believe. It's always fun when these websites don't agree with one another about this sort of thing, let me tell you. Anyway, while the game was a North American exclusive for the Genesis, it did make appearances on other consoles, and actually was originally a release for the NES in late 1991. And when it did eventually make its way to the Genesis almost a year later, Acclaim was out to make the most of their license and also released versions of the game for the Game Boy and the Super Nintendo at the same time. So how is the Genesis version of the game? Is it worth playing on a console in a sea of other sports titles? Or is this game more representative of Roger's own 1993 season, which stands as the worst of his career and definitely not worthy of MVP contention? Well, we shall see, but first a look at the package. Okay, and this is my copy of Roger Clemens MVP Baseball. Once you end up with over 1,000 games in a collection, remembering when or how you picked up certain games gets to be a bit hazy. I remember specifically one trip to the Southeast where I flew back with literally an entire duffel bag filled to the brim with games, and the TSA guy had to scan my bag and just kind of looked at me like, "You are one weird dude," before passing me through. The whole point is I probably brought back 30 games on that trip, and I'm not sure that I could specifically name any of them except for Pugsy, which the guy at Player's Choice in Myrtle Beach made fun of me for buying, and I probably deserve that. Anyway, the whole point of all that is, for Roger Clemens MVP Baseball, I do remember exactly where I was when I purchased it. It was about 5 years ago or so at the Midwest Gaming Classic in Milwaukee, and I remember it because it wasn't on top of the table with all the games that they were clearly trying to sell. Oh, no. It was in a box down below the table amongst a bunch of other cheaper titles. I think I ended up picking it up for $4 from that literal bargain bin. Even though it was in said bargain bin, though, it's actually in pretty great shape.
The hang tab was removed at the top, but other than that, and some sticker residue that I was able to clean off, the overall condition is pretty great, with both the outer and inner cover being fully intact with no physical damage or sun bleaching, and the inside is almost new as well. Complete copies of the game currently go for not much more than that $4 I spent on mine, which is not a great sign from a quality game perspective, but I'm not going to pass judgment on it just yet. As far as the front cover goes, I like it. This is an interesting use of photo art, with Roger's picture being slowly pixelated into a form that is supposed to resemble what players will see when playing the game, I guess. The extra colorful logo at the top, I'm not sure it needed that green highlight on the edges, stands out, and I like the placement of the baseball on the side. I think the only thing that I don't love is that 8 meg stamp at the top. Of course, this was right in the middle of all the megabit wars, so I understand why they did it, but it still looks kind of ugly just put there like that. With there not being any other international versions, there's not any other Sega art to compare this to, but there is the original NES version, which didn't have the pixelated art, and I do think that this is an improvement on that, which, while nice, does look a bit plain in comparison. Flipping over the back, and well, this is a bit of a mess. I like what they were going for here with lots of pictures of the action and screenshots, especially the large inset at the top, but it really feels like it could have been organized a little better, especially with the captions and the flavor text in the middle looking just kind of thrown together. Points for effort, though. Opening up the package, and as mentioned, the manual and cartridge are pristine, which, like the price of the game, could be a bad sign, as it somewhat indicates that this particular copy probably spent most of its life in a box on a shelf and not actually being played. The manual is solid and not only explains how to play the game well, it's also got tons of art and screenshots included, so there clearly was some effort involved in the design. I think my only issue here is that if you flip over to the rear cover, there's ads for other Acclaim, Arena, Flying Edge titles for the Genesis, and due to that, I'm reminded of one of the worst games that I've played so far on the channel in NBA All-Star Challenge. Let's forget we saw that and get on to the review, shall we? When doing these reviews, while I usually do a decent amount of research before actually playing the game, one thing I try very hard not to do is look at other people's reviews of these games, because I don't want to be predisposed at liking or not liking a game just because of something that someone else said. And this is especially important for games that I've never played before, like Roger Clemens MVP Baseball. However, sometimes it's unavoidable. Maybe I accidentally see some review scores on Moby Games or GameFAQs. Maybe it's something that I've seen posted about on social media, or in the case of this game, I've heard about it discussed on a podcast. I mentioned this here because, and I can't remember if it was on Pat Contry's podcast or his YouTube channel, but I specifically remember him trashing the NES version of this game pretty badly. And sure enough, I went to go verify that by looking at his NES guidebook, and indeed the NES version of the title only garnered 1 star. So between that, and say what you will about Pat, I think he tends to have some pretty decent opinions on older titles, and the fact that I was able to pick up the game in such good condition for a song at MGC, and the fact that there was that ad for NBA All-Star Challenge on the back of the manual, I was really dreading popping this one in to play it. Reviewing a bad game for the channel is one thing, but reviewing a bad sports game for the channel is next level no bueno. But you can't really review the game without playing it, so ignoring it isn't an option. Well, I mean, I suppose I could have treated it like I treated novels for book reports in high school English, but no one wants to see that, and I do have some level of integrity, at least as it comes to the channel anyway. On boot up, I was treated to a nice rollicking bit of intro music, and then the very sparse start screen, which gives you the option of a 1-player game, a 2-player game, or the options menu, which doesn't have that many actual options, but definitely 2 that you might want to be aware of that I'll get to in a bit. If you go to the single-player route, you get 3 more options. You can either play an exhibition game, start a season, or continue a season, via password, of course. What, did you think we were getting battery backup with that big 8 megabit cartridge? you must not know Acclaim very well. The season options aren't full baseball seasons as we would think of them, but 3-game series against each of the teams that are in your league. As you're probably not surprised to hear, the game has no licensing deals of any kind other than with Roger Clemens himself, who you will find playing for the Boston team while sporting ridiculous stats that of course are a bit inflated from anything that he actually achieved while playing in Major League Baseball. I suppose at least Sculpture Software managed to actually get him in the game, unlike how Reggie Jackson didn't actually appear in Reggie Jackson Baseball for the Master System. And before you come at me with, well, Reggie Jackson was retired when that game came out, the rosters were complete fantasies. They could have figured it out. Having said that, while the rosters in both games don't bear much resemblance to reality, although if you look closely there's clearly some players in Roger Clemens MVP Baseball whose names or takes on real players, I'd say that Reggie Jackson actually got a little closer to reality than Roger Clemens did, with Reggie Jackson Baseball technically going a bit too far with some of the logos, clearly infringing on MLB licenses. Most baseball games that I've reviewed, even if they didn't have MLB licensing, which is actually going to be every baseball game I review outside the World Series Baseball series, spoiler, at least tried to make the teams seem similar to their real-life counterparts. And this isn't to say that Roger Clemens MVP Baseball doesn't do that, but I definitely got the feeling that what we got with this game was more in there was an attempt category, rather than actually hitting the mark. To their credit, as far as the season play and game goes, I mentioned that you end up playing each team in your league 3 times. And due to the fact that the game does feature teams split amongst an American division and a national division, much like in real life, if you choose an American division team, your season will be 39 games, versus 33 in the national division, due to the American League having 14 teams and the National League having 12 teams. However, when naming the teams, well, things got a little weird. My beloved Chicago Cubs, yeah, they're now the Swords, which I don't think I've ever heard used as a team name in any sport. The White Sox are now the Redbirds, complete with red uniforms. Clemens' own Boston Red Sox are now the Crabs, and okay, I guess that one kind of makes sense, I guess. But in the second most poor taste choice the developers made, the New York Yankees have been completely flipped and are now the New York Rebels, which at best is a completely nonsensical name, but if you're listening to this, you probably realize that it gets worse. Which it does by having the Rebels team graphic be the Confederate battle flag. Now, granted, the world has changed a lot in the last 32 years, and in 1992 we were only 7 years removed from the ending of Dukes of Hazzard, but I'm pretty sure nothing could have prepared me for seeing that graphic in the team choice screen. However, I said that was the second most poor taste choice the developers made. Well, what was the first? Well, for that, San Francisco is now the Quakes rather than the Giants, just 3 years after the World Series was interrupted in San Francisco by an earthquake that measured 7.1 on the Richter scale while killing 63 people and injuring almost 4,000. Yeah, maybe just a bit too soon on that one, guys. Anyway, once you come to terms with the game only resembling reality if you have astigmatism, it's time to actually play the game. And this is where I was really apprehensive because I've played plenty of unlicensed sports games, and while not being able to have real players or teams is an annoyance, it's something that I'm pretty used to at this point. No, I was more concerned about the big marketing point of Roger Clemens MVP Baseball, which is its unique take on fielding, that has you playing the ball not from an over-the-top view based around home plate, but instead you play from a view from the outfield behind the players, similar to if the pitcher-centric view from hardball was used for the entire defense. This defensive view was one of Pat Contry's main complaints about the NES version of the game, with it apparently just being flat out broken in that version. Now, personally, I can't speak to that NES version because I haven't played it, but for the Genesis version, I actually didn't mind how fielding worked, and on the contrary, as someone who played baseball in real life for 6 years, I really enjoyed the concept of having the outfield-based view because it was like how baseball looks when you're on the field playing it. And I'm not familiar with any other game even attempting a similar scenario. Except, well, there is one catch. Due to most baseball games having that behind the home plate view, traditionally, when you go to throw to one of the bases, you'll be pressing a direction that lines up with that base. So to throw to second, you press up and throw. To throw to first, you press right and throw, etc. Because of that, I've got 30 years of muscle memory of the bases relating to certain cardinal directions, and now they don't line up with how the game is oriented. It's something that you can certainly adjust to, and the game actually has 2 settings for controls for this, but due to how things are laid out now, both are a little bit of a pain if you're used to other baseball games. While fielding, well, wasn't perfect, we'll say, what I really had an issue with was the pitching. And not so much how to pitch per se, which is basically just like every other RBI baseball based title, but instead just how good of a hitter the computer is. The computer will absolutely never swing at a ball as opposed to a strike. Seriously, in the 5 games that I played, not once did it happen. I did manage to get incredibly lucky and get a handful of strikeouts, but most of them involved at least one foul ball and a called third strike where the batter didn't swing. The result of this is that the computer gets a lot of hits. Granted, some of those, I'll admit, were me still getting used to the fielding system, but for the most part, the computer, with almost every batter, was like going up against some amalgam of Ted Williams and Hank Aaron. The best thing that I could come up with was to pitch away from the batter at all times, and to never throw a fastball. But even that requires you to field error-free, and if you happen to leave the other option from the option screen turned on for errors, there's a not insignificant chance that your player is going to goof up that fly ball that should have been a sure thing. The graphics in the game were better than I was expecting. It still doesn't look amazing, mind you, with all of the player sprites being the same, just with different colors representing the different jerseys, and with all the games taking place in the same field. But there were a few small details that I liked, like the batter occasionally blowing a big bubble from their bubblegum, the digitized picture of Wrigley Field that's the backdrop between innings, or maybe the cinema sequence that's shown when you hit a home run, which is very Tecmo-like. Remember, I was thinking NBA All-Star Challenge when I first booted it up, so to get a game that looked and felt like an actual baseball game was a nice surprise. Along with the graphics, the sound in-game is solid as well. There's not a whole lot of music, but the music that is included isn't bad, and you can turn it off if you get tired of it, which is always a nice option in sports titles. I would have liked to have heard the crowd noise a bit more, as it's only reserved for very certain moments. But the other sound effects, like the crack of the bat and the speech used for the umpires, is clear and well done. I think my only real complaint is that I would like to have heard the sound expanded, because when you compare the game to something like a Sports Talk Baseball or Hardball 3, not having an announcer definitely feels like something is missing. But this is a nitpick at best. I can honestly say that Roger Clemens MVP Baseball is a nice surprise, but that tends to happen when you have zero expectations for a title, like I did going in, and due to what I'd heard about other versions of the game. However, just because the game exceeded my expectations does not necessarily make it a good baseball game. Ultimately, it's mediocre, and in my opinion, badly in need of some play balancing, especially at the plate. No licensing for players or teams, no stat tracking, no real full season, no alternate game modes like Home Run Derby, no battery backup, and only one stadium all add up to a game that, while I do like certain things about it, is ultimately just okay. As a result, I'm giving Roger Clemens MVP Baseball 2 stars. There's some good ideas here, but unfortunately, I think the game really needed a bit more polish to compete with the better baseball titles on the console.
Okay, and that is it for Roger Clemens MVP Baseball for the Genesis. I always enjoy the weeks when there's a game that exceeds my expectations for what I had for it, But when that means that I played a 2-star game instead of a 1 or 0 star, it's a little less impressive. I think the best case scenario for this game is possibly if you'd rented it to play against a friend. I could see how that would be a fun weekend. But long term, there's no way that I could recommend this over something like Sports Talk Baseball, which beat it to the market by about 4 months. That game I've got on the schedule in about 20 episodes or so, hopefully around the time of the World Series this year, and I'm definitely looking forward to that. Next time on Zilog and Moto, it's been 3 weeks in a row on the Genesis, so I think it's time to get back to the Master System. I've been wanting to review both Super Space Invaders and Super Off-Road for a while to follow up on previous reviews, but I don't have either of those yet. Maybe later on this year. Instead, how about another Master System title that was a European exclusive? Well, I guess technically it came out later in Brazil, but you know what I mean. I guess Sega could only choose one game to release in the US in October of 1991, and, well, when the competition is Sonic the Hedgehog, yeah. I am curious to see if this game could put up any kind of battle against that competition, though. Well, that's it for Zilog and Moto episode 238. If you liked what you saw here and want to see more, please think about liking and subscribing if you're so inclined, as it will help more people see these videos. But most importantly, whatever you like to play, have fun and be excellent to each other. Later.